Welcome back for another Bigwater podcast. Thanks for tuning in, whether you're on YouTube or one of those many download sites. If you can't find us for some reason, bigwaterfishing.com. But we're doing something a little different again. We're trying to kind of think outside the box. So make sure you guys, send us some emails, DMs, or however you want to get to us. If there's something you want to see a little different, we're trying to kind of, skirt that box a little bit, not just be regular old. And we're going outside the box a little bit, and we're getting my buddy Josh Miller on here. So we're not going to talk too long, but he is basically doing things that kind of how I used to do them way back in the day, just a whole lot fancier now, yet simple at the same time. So hopefully I have your interest peaked, and we're not going to wait any longer. And we're going to bring my buddy Josh Miller into the Bigwater podcast. There you are.
Made it.
I just shaved my beard today, and if you guys are watching this on YouTube, you can see Josh has got a ginger-ish thick beard.
I got a little. I told you I have a little in there.
Yeah. Oh, I see. There's a lot more in the little, son. There's a lot more in the little. I wish I wouldn't have shaved the thing. It looked like a red squirrel died in my toilet there when I was handfuls of that stuff. My mom was like, you look like you're homeless. So
I've got to look a little presentable at work. I work in construction, but I got to be a little cleaner.
You got to be a little rough, but a little cleaner.
Yeah, for the collared shirt days.
So let me tell you how this just came about, everybody, and Josh too. I don't honestly scroll through a lot of stuff, believe it or not, because there's so many things I have to do. But yet, Facebook and Instagram, those things, a lot of those, when we're not doing what I have to do in the business end of things, it's just kind of like, okay, thank God I'm done. But scrolling through there, guys, I have seen Josh's stuff, and he's catching them, boys. He's catching them. And here's the thing that we can see his feet, and we can see, he's like on shore with this stuff.
Yeah.
So, one of the things, one of my other buddies we had on there is I think they call themselves rock hoppers or something. But basically, for you guys that aren't from the Ohio area or whatever, we've really got a lot of people that fish from shore. And, I've got buddies in Nebraska, they're fishing off, dams, and they're doing all kinds of stuff like this too. And kind of how this came about is I get a lot of people that are like, hey man, I don't have $100,000 plus Ranger this, and it's just expensive, fuel, all these things, even if somebody had a boat for you. And I really think that, the shore options are, they're as many or more than there used to be. You know what I mean? Would you agree with that?
There may be a little more crowded now. There's definitely a lot more foot traffic, but if you're willing to put in just a little bit of work, there's all kinds of access that you can find. I'm in Ohio, and I'm assuming a lot of your audience is probably in the Midwest region. We have a lot of the same stuff. Dams hold fish, bridges hold fish. If you're within 45 minutes, why not just send it and go for it? And a lot of times you'll be surprised. Sometimes there won't be anybody. Then all of a sudden, it's like word got out. Next day, they know the bite was hot. It's like, you kind of got to be. You don't know unless you're there. So.
And if somebody hasn't listened to that podcast, we talked about giant walleyes from shore, I think was the name of that one. They have a lot of the same kind of questions, and just to get ahead of this. So anybody listening to this that thinks like we're going to start giving out, like, go to, A road, B road, or whatever, like, get out of here. What we're going to do is even better. We're going to help, dial you into some of the things that took, me and you both a ton of time, because before I was doing all the stuff that I'm doing, when I was in high school and even in college at Ohio State, we found all of these places to shore fish because that's all we could do. Right. And it's kind of weird, but I honestly miss some of that stuff a little bit, some of that little Podoc thing, or maybe even sneaking in somewhere here or there, you know what I mean?
Yep. And that's sometimes I call it trespassing, maybe it's not 100% legal, but
that's a t-shirt. Yeah.
I didn't know.
So yeah, that's a t-shirt right there. But so I think one of the biggest things is, how are you finding some of this productive water? Because even the thing that I'll toot your horn a little bit here as I look through, your Instagram, like, and again, I don't know the details. We haven't talked about this, and that's kind of the point. Like, I want this to be fresh for me, just like it is everybody else. But when I see you going on vacation, or who knows, girlfriend's house somewhere, whatever, like, you're in Florida and you're still catching them, right? And so the point is a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about is it allows you to be an angler. Like I think so many people nowadays, they just want to be like, oh, I want to go here. And it's like, it's not a video game.
Right.
But once you have if you take a little bit of effort, a lot of the same stuff that you're going to do Ohio, maybe you don't live in Ohio where me and Josh do, but if you're in Nebraska or Minnesota or Florida, a lot of the same stuff applies because
Yeah.
fishing's fishing.
I think once that kind of clicked for me, it took a while because it kind of seems like when you're going to a destination, maybe the fish seem unobtainable, or you need XYZ, or you don't have a boat, or tide's not right, or whatnot. But if you can have the confidence to go try, a lot of times you'll be surprised at the outcome. I think that's the hardest part, is tricking yourself mentally into wanting to go. If you've been a few times and been skunked, you have to be confident enough to go try it again. And like you said, it all translates. Whether you're in Florida or uh, the Great Lakes. I fish Lake Erie a lot. It all kind of translates. Kind of funny. Everything eats a minnow. Like, doesn't matter the species or where you're at, location. Everything will eat a minnow, and it doesn't have to be a live minnow. Once I kind of fell into the artificial lures as a kid, I never came back.
So, we're talking about like eating a minnow. Like you hit that right. One of the guys that taught me the game, his thing was fish don't go far from the grocery store. And I, remind myself of that all the time where it's like we just overcomplicate and overthink this. So how are you breaking this down? Let's just start in Ohio, right? Let's just say some of the farm ponds or what are the type of bodies of water that you're fishing a majority of the time without telling exactly where they're at. Just kind of run through some of the stuff you're doing.
Yeah, it kind of sometimes comes down to availability. Kind of looking at what I have around. And growing up where I did, it was kind of limited. A lot of times I'd end up fishing a pond, and sometimes you may think there's a 1 pound bass, or maybe that's it. Big fish hang around little fish too. So just because you've been to a spot a million times and only caught small fish, there might be that big 5 pounder lurking, next cast type of thing. And it may be something you've overlooked. Small neighborhood ponds. I'm not above trying anything if I think there's a fish in it, really. And sometimes that's part of the fun. It's kind of putting the puzzle pieces together. And if you can find your own bite, a lot of times that's more enjoyable than having someone take you to point A and tell you to cast to point B with lure C, and yada yada. When you're able to do it yourself, it's a lot more rewarding, I think, at least for me. And even if you're
Well,
not, at Lake Erie, you may have a neighborhood pond, the city may have a small pond that you've looked at a million times and never done it, but you never know until you try.
yeah, I think that, the thing is obviously it's going to be totally different if you're got 3 hours after work of, sunlight or something like that, or you got a Saturday and you can go somewhere. So are you like, let's start with like farm ponds. Like what are some of the key areas? I guess is kind of universal, or small ponds or something
Yeah.
like that. What are the things, whether it's starting with probably getting permission or which ones suck?
Yeah.
Or, is there any, give us the breakdown on that.
Permission's probably a big thing. Like I said, I'll push it, but I'm not trying to get a ticket per se. So if there is a spot, a lot of times people are pretty receptive to you knocking on the door saying, "Hey, is it okay?" A lot of times people will do it and not ask for permission, and they'll show you some respect for knocking and uh, letting them know who you are and what you're trying to do. I've had that work in my favor a few times. And really, if it's been there a while, there's probably some fish in it. If it seems like it's an older pond, and it may even be a little muddy, tiny little drain runoff thing. You never know, and that's one thing I've been surprised by. You'll try to key in on certain things, maybe rocks, or let's say there's a pond that has a little creek dumping into it or something like that. Those are always, I would I would say like a primary target, but a lot of times you'll find something you didn't know was there just by trying. And um, some of my more memorable catches have been in positions like that, where it's not, a destination trip, but it's like, hey, I've got an hour after work or before work, and let me go see what's in, this little pond behind this playground. Um, and it may only be one bite, but it can be a lot of fun. A lot of times it's
Well,
over.
kind of getting ahead of where I was kind of mentally thinking, but I think that one of the things that I always did in the springtime, like when I was in college and that we would run and we wouldn't even necessarily fish, especially if it was kind of early. And we would just go see where you could visually see some of these fish that are on beds or up shallow. Cause then you're like, hey, pond A has fish in it. Like pond B has
Exactly.
barely anything in it. And so sometimes the old eye test, as they say, and even before you maybe, you work to get permission or you start promising some venison or something to some farmer or whatever it may be. You
Yeah.
find out if you even got jack in there. But so as we go from farm ponds, I see like a lot of stuff just in your things again, small rivers. I think that's one of the probably to me, especially like where I went to college at. You guys all know OH IO there. There are some rivers around there that are really I they're sleepers, but they shouldn't be. How about
They
that?
they should be on the map. I think they're getting there, but it's really surprising, and I think, like you said earlier, a lot of that can translate. If you have an older, glaciated river system, there's probably a really well established, you know, species of fish in there somewhere. It may not be bass, it may not be your super target species, but um, even those off-brand, off bycatch type fish can still be enjoyable. That's one thing. I'm not above white bass. I'm not taking them home and filling the freezer with them, but you can find some really good stuff in some small creeks, and it can be a really unique situation where you wouldn't know they were there unless you had your boots on the ground there in the creek, and that's,
So
I think, kind of motivates me to keep going.
So getting back there for producer good kills me because he's always like, stay on target, stay on target. So how to find the productive water, that's
Yeah.
like the number one thing, right? And are again things that I just think of now that if I try to picture things because it's like I fish for a living. That's what I do, right? So I'm always trying to maybe overcomplicate or over technical thing, but yet it's almost like it just makes it a whole lot better because I'm just thinking if we would have had when I was doing that stuff, what we now have with mapping and
Yeah.
like, Google Earth and stuff like that was all right at the cusp of that. Like I didn't even have an dating myself a little bit, but I didn't have an email address till I was basically in college. So, what are some of the other things, or how are you utilizing things like maybe Google Earth or something?
Yeah. Google Maps is a good one. I've even used OnX. I know it's more of a hunting app, but when it comes to property lines and stuff like that, that's a good one. And even I'm on FishBrain. I don't really use it religiously. I will look on there, and sometimes maybe there's a body of water that's got some catches that are logged in it that are surprising, and sometimes you can't go off that stuff. But you never know till you go. And I think it's a saltwater saying I kind of picked up in those. The guy was telling me, 90% of your fish are in about 10% of the water. So it's like if you
Oh,
can
that's an
narrow.
old one.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from, but I heard it, and it's not like, I wouldn't say a rule, but I was kind of like, oh, if you can narrow it down to maybe fish that 10% of water and fish instead of fishing the 90%, you can put the odds in your favor. And really, that's
Yeah.
what I would try to do. If you can,
Country Steve always says that he's going to catch 90% of my 10% is what he tells me. But so back on the onyx, like here's another one too. And I just as I'm thinking of things, you tell me, what's going through your brain. But like I know people that use that onyx, like you said, hunting, but also just when we're out looking at property or doing different things. I would think that would be a really good way if somebody's getting into this or wanting to do this, that you would find out what is, whose property, not only from a farmer's standpoint, but also what's public. Because there's a lot of things that you could access that probably people don't think you can, or maybe somebody says you can't go in here, but you can, and then all of a sudden a game ward does come or something. He's like, "Oh no, you can," but maybe you're that guy, that doesn't want to push it. You're taking your granddaughter or something out there. You don't want to be ridiculous.
yep,
So
if there were kids involved, that's kind of like, I'll look at if I have anybody with me. But I've been in that situation before where I've been in the river and people have no trespassing signs. I get it, but it's a navigable waterway, and if you are using a public access to get in the river, they can't kick you out. I know that. I mean, just because they own the other side of the river, it gets kind of ticky tacky. But yeah,
oddly, I know exactly where you're talking about too. And I might have caught some brownfish there back in the day, a little before your time, probably. But yeah, I think, and and I'm not even going to say, but I'm pretty sure we're talking about not only the same area, same stretch, But, in this particular thing that I'm thinking of anyhow, but it doesn't matter, but is, you wouldn't think to fish there because at times the water is so low and so clear that you're like, there's nothing that could
Oh
be
yeah,
here.
you would think you could see them, and I can't tell you how many times I've been somewhere going to, I'm walking through the river trying to get somewhere I fished before, and I'll see fish somewhere I would have never thought they were there. And it's the same story. It's so low and it's so clear. They're probably dragging their belly on the ground. But that just it's
Sometimes
kind
I think they almost get stuck in some of those pools, where they're like,
yeah.
let's not get out of here.
I think here lately, well, we've had this drought. It almost seemed like they were doing it out of necessity. I don't know if they needed oxygen or what, but it was like they were halfway in and halfway out of the water, sitting in a ripple. And it's like, well, I guess I'll cast in the ripple. Like you kind of got to be a sponge. That's one thing too. Like I'm always trying to pay attention to the surroundings. It can tell you a lot, even if it's just crawfish. If they're going through a color phase, and you can key in on something, if they got a blue hint or something, it can mean all the difference in the world. It seems kind of silly, but it's like you said, in a clear water situation, which is a lot of the Midwest, I think you can find that the craws kind of go through a pattern throughout the year. And I've noticed there's been times, maybe you find a blue hint, maybe find a red tint, something, and that'll be what they key in on. And if you can find those kind of things, you'll find bites that people definitely overlook.
Let's stay on the big picture things, not fine tuner quite yet. But I think that, like, are there certain types of rivers or things that you say that, hey, you need to expand upon or keep looking for things like this, or some that just maybe, in theory they look good, but then it's like, heck no. I almost think the stuff that looks good is not as good as the stuff that looks bad in my experience. As crazy as that sounds, maybe it's because of the depth, or there's too much current, or
And that's what's unique. Like we're talking about the river, it's always changing, and I think that's kind of you gotta go see. Even from season to season, things can change. One bend in the river might be one way in the spring, but then you might have some floods that happen in the summer, kind of change the way things set up. And the best thing you can do is go try. And I mean, I'll look for older, more established river systems, and then try to find smaller creeks, feeder creeks, anything that's got a hard bottom. If you can find rock, that seems to be a, a good indicator that there's some predatory fish around somewhere. Even small, pebbly, sandy stuff, um, I'll give it all a go. It's really kind of fun putting the puzzle together. I think when you do find that good water, like you said, it may not look the best. It may have been something you wrote off driving by 10 times in a row and said, there's no way there's fish there, but just go try it. You never
well, I
know.
mean, so there's a good question. I think that I would even ask my buddies is, how many times would you go to a body of water, no matter what kind it is, before you're just like, screw this noise?
It's tough.
Because I mean, sometimes what could be good, like you said, in the spring is not good in the fall, and vice versa. Rather, it's how you can access it or cast, because where the fish are positioned. Because again, the whole point of the kind of this podcast is doing things that are reasonably accessible. Not having to get too crazy with this. So, but and I know there's not a good answer, but I mean, how long before you write this off in your mind? A lot of these.
There are still places that I try. I still ask myself why, and it may only be a couple casts here and there. Uh, I guess kind of go with your gut. The more that you do it, the better kind of feeling you can have sometimes, I think. And I try to not write something off unless it's personal. Maybe I lost a lure, maybe I slipped and fell or something getting in, and then I'll write it off. But a lot of times, if I'm in the area and I still have a spot, I said, hey, maybe this will have something. If I got the time, I still kind of try to go check it out. And a lot of people, time is the most valuable resource probably everybody listening to this has. And if you can find it, use it. If you have half an hour before work, or you have an hour after work, and maybe that spot hasn't produced, go try it again. Maybe this time is different, and that's hard. But sometimes you got to be, maybe dumb enough to just try it.
Well, and I think that, sometimes we overthink this stuff. I mean, I'll see people that are going to, like, let's say, subdivision ponds, right? Whether you're supposed to be there or not, or you got a buddy that lives in one. Like when we were in college, that was the deal. It's like people were literally like, hey, you need to move into this apartment complex because it's got a pond, and then we can come down with your parking card or whatever, right?
Exactly.
We're probably incriminating ourselves here on international levels, but nevertheless, I think the statute of limitations is up on me. I don't know about you, but a lot of times those were obviously, it was either the biggest bust or the biggest go, because I think, like you said, some of them just didn't have it. But I mean, I think sometimes common sense, and I always I talk these out, and that's what I want you to do too, because a lot of people maybe don't have the experience, and it's not as common sense for them. Because yeah, if you have a new apartment complex or something, no, there's not fish in there that you want to catch of the size, because 99% of the time they did not pay to put those in there. And if the thing's only been there 2 years, they couldn't have gotten big enough, right? Where you
Right.
see some of those that are more established, or maybe it's like, you go on one end of a subdivision, or because it's
Yeah.
been there for 5 years, you don't go on the new end of it. Um,
Check.
little things like that, right?
I'll look at the concrete, even like say there's a culvert in the pond. Look at the concrete, see how old it.
Expert tip right there.
I'm
Expert
not
tip.
getting anything out for free, but I'll put some people on game there. So
That's expert tips. Yeah, and that's one, that's kind of what we're here trying to do, because that's obviously not giving up your little honey holes, but like, if somebody really wants to pay attention, like things like that, just a little bit of common sense with looking at the concrete, right?
yeah, it seems kind of
So
silly, but you can tell, maybe that looks a little older than this part, and a lot of times it'll, like if it's been there 10, 15 years, they're probably pretty well established if it's not completely grown over. And I've found some really large fish in those that you would have never thought would be there. And I don't know if people have put them there, but I've had some stuff really blow my mind.
yeah, well, the one thing that I kind of always struggled with, and I don't know if it's just, maybe it's in Ohio we have a fair amount of reservoirs. Most of them, I wouldn't say they're big, I wouldn't say they're small. I think maybe from my standpoint, or at least where I'm blaming why I didn't do well a majority of the time, is I think a lot of the fish, minus those small windows in the spring and the fall, they were set up offshore and I couldn't get to them.
They're
You
hard to
know,
get to.
I've got a really good buddy now who lives in kind of central Ohio, and he's got a little tiller boat like me, and he's just tearing it up, and he's a good fisherman. And he's actually been on our podcast, but I'll leave it at that. And he's always telling me how, both getting the bite dialed in, but also just on how many hits or misses even from a boat. So reservoirs to me are the hardest, minus those little windows when they're going to stack on the bank. Have you
Yeah,
found the same thing?
yeah, definitely. And it can be kind of intimidating. But I was in Westerville, so Central Ohio again, and one of the larger reservoirs, Alum Creek. It can be a grind. I mean, I can tell everybody where to go all day, but unless the conditions are right, it doesn't really matter. Um, but just having the open mind, I think, like keep it simple when it comes to your tackle, but just follow the wind. Look for some birds, look for bait if you can narrow down such a large body of water. If you can narrow it down, I kind of try to put everything kind of in my quiver that I can. Wind direction, what's the water temp, um, even like previous history there. I've caught fish here. Let's try it. I've caught fish here. Maybe I'll catch fish here adjacent to so and so. So
I think that we kind of skipped over it quick here, but I think to me, the biggest thing that people, and I kind of phrased a little bit different of how many times before you give up. But I think the thing that I could tell you from personal experience, and I'd like to know yours, is, when you say time of year, because when, if somebody goes there where these bass are on beds 4 feet off the shore, right? Like, and then they go back and they're like, "Oh, this place sucks now." It's like,
yeah,
they're offshore at a place that you probably can't get a lure because they're in some tree or telephone pole or whatever is out there that you don't really have access to without hanging up or just not getting a good cast on them, type of thing. And the same thing, like you mentioned, Alum Creek. I'm going to throw a little bit out there because everybody kind of knows, but you go there at night, it's a whole different story, and
yeah.
generally for the better. So a lot of these really clean reservoirs, or those that have high pressure, nighttime can be the right time. That's a t-shirt.
There you go. There's another one.
Yeah, that's two t-shirts, and we're only like 20 minutes in. I love it. But so time of year, give me something on, some little kind of, let's say, rules of thumb by Josh, if you will, on time of year stuff.
Hey, bridges and dams hold fish, so I'll start at a dam and work my way down a whole river system. And I mean, especially in the springtime, those fish are pushing back towards probably where they came from. And a lot of times, if they can't get to it, they're going to stack up somewhere. And really, if you can find that, it can be every cast. I hate to say that out loud, but meat even on some saugeye, especially in the springtime. Um, I've had some remarkable days where I wouldn't think, this time of year, this water condition, that the fish would be there. But it's always kind of a surprise. I think that's part of what kind of keeps me motivated to keep trying, because sometimes it is a grind. I can't act like I'm always catching them. You always see the successful times, but especially at a place like Allen Creek, it can be a grind. But that one or two fish you catch might be, trophy. Um, I've been actually on an Allen Creek grind for a muskie, so I kind of have a sour taste in my mouth.
It's funny you say, because I got there's a guy that's on social media, and my buddies send me pictures, kind of basically dogging this guy because he's like, another limit. And the joke with us is, you either fish 4 days a year or you suck, because you know what I mean. Like, they're just like you said, you don't see the failures, which is fine. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
but I'm also, I know you're like, you're showing a few fish, but you're not out there bragging like some of these knuckleheads. So that's a
yeah,
whole different deal. But and I think that's kind of the thing you hinted at it, shall we say, early on, where the internet. And I think now, like, I don't understand. I guess we live in this hero world or something, where back when I was doing this thing, obviously we didn't have social media. But and there was guys that would run their mouth a little bit, don't get me wrong. But I think with some of the guys I used to like, especially I mainly did night walleye fishing from shore, right? I'm going to tell you straight up, you'd have got a beat down, like a straight
oh,
beat down, if you would have went and said, "Hey, X pier is on fire for 5 days in a row." Now people are putting this shit on Facebook and Instagram, like, "Get down here while it's hot."
yeah. I can't believe it. It drives me up a wall. And that's a lot of times what I try to get away from. Um, maybe it's a really well established run, but sometimes you can find your own bite adjacent to that. You don't have to be shoulder to shoulder on said pier, casting with bait A, that we had listed on the Facebook page. you know,
Yeah, I just think it's funny because, like, in the parking lot, people always see, and I'll see these guys pull up and they'll sit there and wait for me to unload guide clients' fish and stuff. And it's like, obviously, we have to do things differently then than if it's just me and you screwing around. I mean, it's kind of common sense, right? These people want to take some pictures, or they're not hiding this like maybe I would. And then people, that I see in the parking lot are like, "What the hell?" And then I'll usually tell them something like, I'm totally blowing my cover here, but I'll say something like, "Hey, we're getting ready to fish a tournament, so I can't really get into things." And people are like, "Well, I'm not fishing the tournament. I just want to post it on my social media." And I'm like, "What? Like, huh?"
I know.
Like,
I don't know. This,
I don't, I
clout-
can't understand that.
yeah, it's like this clout chasing. I hate to use that word clout, but it's really. I mean, if that's what you're out there for, it's probably the wrong reasons, and you may be successful, but you're not going to find fulfillment. If
Well,
that's what you're out there for.
and not to sound like an old man here, but those are the first people to complain about, "Hey, what happened? It sucks," or, I got to get here at 3 in the afternoon to make a cast because everybody's already there. And it's like, yeah, what do you think's going to happen? And I think that's kind of the point of some of the stuff we have and are going to talk about is that you need to put in a little time. Like, you just got to put in your time. If you're doing shooting stuff, like, you've got to put in your time. I mean, if you're shooting a bow, if there's guys that are going to go up, the day after they buy a bow, and they're going to go shoot, and then there's the guy that's been flinging arrows for 3 or 4 months or more. And I can't relate to that other guy, and I'm not gonna, like, make excuses for him, but I'm also not gonna help him out. You know what I mean? Right? That's just like
Exactly.
it's a whole
And
different deal. But
if I see somebody that's putting the time in, I'm way more willing to throw them a little bone here and there if I can tell that you're doing it for the right reasons. But like you said, it's like bow hunting is a good analogy. I mean, with a crossbow, you can kind of pick it up and shoot it, but with a longbow or a compound bow, you got to shoot arrows every day. And I think fishing, it kind of translates a little bit the same way. You got to cast every day. You got to set the hook. You got to be doing the thing. Like, you can put yourself in the right spot and have the right conditions, but you got to stay on your game, and you got to be out there to do it. You can't do it from the couch. Can't catch them from the couch. Another
It's
t-shirt.
funny because even when I go on the road or I'm doing something at shows or whatever, and I go back to backing a boat in, which I've done, I don't know how many thousands of times in my life, and I don't do it for a couple of weeks. I'm not gonna lie to you, it's not like it's bad, but it takes a few seconds where I've almost got to like knock myself on the head and be like, okay, and then I can make it look pretty smooth. But
You
um,
gotta lock it.
I, yeah. So do you? Let me ask you this, and we're not forget Lake Erie right now, because again, like we had the guy on there talking about the walleyes on Lake Erie. It's kind of a whole different deal, even though we'll get into that a little bit maybe. But on some of this farm pond and river stuff, are you networking at all?
Definitely.
Okay.
And I it's kind of a hush hush thing.
So this is not a Facebook group.
No, no.
Is this
This
just
is
guys you see other guys fishing? You're like, all
if
right, he's
if
pretty
I
cool.
see you
Okay.
there, I've seen you before, and kind of gave the nod a couple times, and it's like there's a little bit of common respect, and if I can feel that respect, I'm more willing to give it. Because like you said, you got to put the work in.
So
Not
so
just
let's
the
be
hang up.
honest. You see Slick Rick on the same little pond you're on, and you're like, man, Slick Rick over there, he's fishing the juice. He knows, right?
Yeah,
This is it something kind of like that? And then
and
you
if
maybe throw him a bone a little bit to then see if he's gonna burn you, don't you?
yeah, and see what he does
Oh
with
yeah.
it. Because if
Oh
it's
yeah.
not the person you tell, it's the person they tell. So it's kind of like there's a
That's
VIP
right.
list for sure.
Yeah, I see. This is like boat stuff without boats, basically, right? Like this is
Exactly.
pay
It's like
pay
funny.
attention.
It all translates. And
Well, and
sometimes
that
if I feel a little pressure, I may leave a spot just to not let somebody know. I'm not above that.
it's just this like you're like a tournament fisherman. I love it. So I the one thing I always I'm kind of one of those wondering guys where I think back of hey, if I would have done this or to try to move forward being better, right? And the one thing I kind of think about back in the day is I just started when I was doing this. Again, this is 30 years ago or whatever or more. Is I was starting to do like the belly boat thing. Okay.
Oh,
And again, it's not like belly boats were new then, but it wasn't for this kind of stuff where you like carry this thing in. How much, even though we're fishing from shore, how much are you utilizing some other things maybe besides just your feet? Or is that
oh
what
yeah.
you're doing?
I've got a kayak and a
Oh, now we're getting
paddleboard
dirty. Now we're
that
getting
I'll
dirty.
that's I've used that in Florida quite a bit because bank fishing in Florida is a totally different animal. You really can't bank fish in Florida the same way you do here. So
How
kind of had to
so?
get I mean, accessibility is one thing, but I mean, wildlife, even just the bank itself is a totally different animal. There's not a lot of hard ground casting wise to stand from. So it's kind of like I had to turn things around and get in the water and kind of fish off a platform.
Josh, like, 30 some years ago, one of the things that I did was I took waiters. Like, I don't understand how people, are sometimes just not seeing outside the box or, it's like there's certain people like athletes or fishermen, or whatever, that just always seem to do better. And I think sometimes they're willing to do what others aren't, but sometimes just little things. And for me, it was waiters and I would just go a couple hundred yards or if that from where everybody's fishing on shore. And I would, not disrupting them, but I think where all the people were pushing the fish, right? Like
Yep.
and I didn't have to worry about casting and being, not being able to quite make that cast or how many times have you done this and all your fish are coming on the first or second crank because you're not quite as far as you need to be. So what are some other things? I mean, like a belly boat, like I'm aging myself. I don't think they even have belly boats anymore. But waders, belly boats. I know you said talking before about like a kayak of some type,
Yeah.
and you can get from 10 grand to $300 on those.
Yeah.
But
And I started cheap. I got a cheap one, and I kind of have upgraded since then because I did enjoy it, but I didn't want to make the investment right away because it's kind of like I'm going to use this and I got to drag it, forever to get there, and then I'm going to throw it in and see what's there, kind of thing. So I have kind of expanded my fleet, I guess, but belly boats are definitely still a thing. I don't have one myself, but I see the Columbus Fishing Expo. There's some guys that do some stuff down at the AP lands with belly boats, and
I
I've,
would
I've
not want to be selling belly boats nowadays. I would not want to make. I don't think you can make any money.
yeah,
Not when you can get a kayak so cheap at Walmart or anything else. I mean, like Fish USA that I work with. I mean, they got some kayaks that are like they're not even kayaks. They're like vessels. They're boats, man.
that's I kind of started down that route, and then I was like, it's crazy. At that point, you might as well have a bass boat. And I get it, to be competitive in some of the kayak series and whatnot. You almost have to have it now, I think. But there's just something about being out there without any electronics and just kind of using your brain a little. And uh,
I think effort. Like if I was to name this thing, I think I'd call it effort because we call him Uncle Jerry, Jeremy Smith from in Fisherman back in the day, and I think he's with the Lingder's Angling Edge now. He's Al's guys, and he was like showing me this. He has a boat that it can't be worth. It's definitely worth more money scrapped than it is together. And he's got like a bunch of sections of like PVC pipe and stuff, and he'll put those PVC pipes down to roll this thing onto some of these small bodies of water where there's
yeah,
no launch. And it's like that's evil genius. Here's a guy who obviously has fancy boats. He's on TV, like, but he's so deep in it that he's looking for little places that everybody can't go. And no boat launch, no problem. Some PVC pipes. It's like what the Egyptians did, right? I mean,
exactly. Building pyramids out here.
yeah, exactly. I mean, sometimes it's just if you want to make an excuse, there'll always be one. But what are some methods that you've come across, whether you do them or not, that you see for again waders, but simple things
Yeah,
or kayaks?
waders
Anything
are
else?
waders. I keep a set in the truck at all times, just in case. Even in the summertime, um, I've pushed it a lot. I'll wet wade like crazy, but some bodies of water you probably shouldn't. You kind of have to play it by ear. But I would err on the side of caution when it comes to that. But waders can be a lifesaver, and like you said, it can get you away from the crowd, and you may be able to access different parts of that bite that you never knew were there, just by wading a couple 100 feet out of the way. That's been a big thing for me. I think that kind of opened up a light bulb in my head. Like everywhere becomes accessible when you're like, oh, I can walk over. It's like, oh, okay. And that's
It,
hard to
you know,
beat.
we we kind of jumped over technology maybe a little bit fast, with let's say the Onyx or looking at Google Maps and things. Is there any other tools that you're going to use to kind of break down an area? Because I think it's just like hunting. What we're doing is like hunting. You have to eliminate all of the bad water or bad areas because you only have so much time to actually do it. And I mean, do you even take time to just straight scout where you're like, I don't have a fishing rod with me, or maybe just like a couple lures and you're fishing, but you're really not?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll have kind of a traveling setup or something, and it's almost like you're scouting more than fishing. You may be casting or you may not be, but you're in the mindset of fishing, so you're looking at things from that perspective. And sometimes just having that on your mind and going and looking at something can help you see things differently. And you may not have to be fishing, but I mean, I'll keep a small travel rod in my truck when I commute to and from work, and just you can use a small swim bait as a depth finder a lot of times. Maybe count it down, uh, and maybe you'll find a snag, but then keep it in the back of your mind that that's there later, and don't let it scare you off. Just kind of like I said earlier, have the confidence to go try, um, and keep it simple. Like if you're out looking for new things, don't overcomplicate it. Uh, start with what you have access to and kind of go from there. I guess it's like it can be overwhelming, so don't make it harder on yourself. I guess is what I'm getting at.
Do you know what one of my expert tips was? One of the best things that I ever did. And again, it's one of those things where everybody else is, like you said, watching football, sitting on the couch. Is again, we don't have as hard of winters as we used to, but I would go on those ponds or small bodies of water, especially the reservoirs, when it was froze over. And again, I started because I was dumb, right? I would drill holes, but then I started using that old like bag full of alcohol and the old flasher, and finding exactly where this structure or the drop offs were. And then, like you said, maybe I couldn't get there, in the summertime or like whatever, they wouldn't allow boats or whatever it would be. But you find out real quick, like, hey, this body of water is 5 feet deep. Like, this is probably not going to be as good as one of those ponds that's got 14, 20 feet out there where they can maybe survive a hard winter or more food. You know what I mean? And now I've had it where I've had shallow ones that are still good, but you find out where that structure is. And so maybe you can cast at that. Is that you liking that?
Yes, that's the big thing too. Saving it for later. depending on the water level, things can change throughout the year. Time of the year, what's the weather been like? Maybe that piece of structure is going to be under the water in the spring, but now it's above water. You never know. So I'm kind of like like a sponge. You're just trying to absorb every little bit of information that you come across, really. And
Well, and it's like, when I see like your Instagram feed or whatever anybody else's, and it's like, again, I'm not knocking anybody when I say this, but like if you're on pond XYZ, like back in the day when I was a kid, we used to call it the Bill Dance ponds, right?
yeah,
Like if you've got access to some killer place, great, all the power to you. But when you just see the guy still holding these 4, 5, 6 pound largemouth or whatever it is, or 1 pound bluegills, but he's in the same Bill Dance pond. Okay. Okay. Yeah, we're jealous a little bit, but like let's talk more about these travel trips, because when I see some of your stuff, and I'm like, all right, he's down in Florida now, even if you got dads, or girlfriends, parents, or whatever it is. But when you're doing some of these travel trips, that shows me where the guy's kind of got it. He understands fishing, right? Or so, what steps on some of these Florida? I say Florida, but it could be wherever, the Carolinas, not Ohio. How about that?
yeah,
So give me some examples of some trips that you've taken and how you kind of dialed that into the area, or some of the things you learned really specifically.
yeah. I started taking trips to Florida with my parents. We had a timeshare that's on a golf course, so I was pond hopping before I even knew what it was, really. Um, and you you got to really,
Florida
I think
ponds are built different, dude. They got gators and big bass.
that's what I mean. Bank fishing's a little bit different, and the success rate isn't probably as high, but you got a shot at a 10 pounder, and I think that's what kind of kept me motivated, because it took a long time before things. I don't want to act like I got it figured out, but to try to start to click a little bit, it really took me dedicating myself to it. I would go, give up, but it was like those little successes. And it doesn't mean you caught a giant. Maybe you found fish visually. Maybe you found a new pond that looks promising. You got to find those little wins and kind of stack them up on top of each other, because that kind of will help build your confidence, so that when you go to a new area, Florida, the Carolinas, Georgia, wherever you're passing through, you can have a little bit of confidence to step outside of your comfort zone and try it, because it can be super rewarding. And like I said, that 90-10 rule, maybe you don't have a successful time that time, but come back again, especially if you're out of state. I'll try a spot as long as I have accessibility. Don't write it off until you have to catch a flight. Because it can be the next cast. Like, that's kind of, I guess, what keeps me out there, because anything I drive by, I'm always looking. Ooh, I want to fish that. I want to fish. How do I get there? Can I get there?
Well, I don't know if you know Troy Linder. It's Al Linder's son. If you look at his Instagram, like, he's a buddy of mine. He's been on our podcast there a while back, and he is an absolute gangster at catching fish with when I say a pocket full of tackle, I mean a pocket, like three things. And we're
I
talking
love it.
about where yeah, he's not like going, and you guys listen to this should go check it out if you're into this stuff. We're not talking about him going to like North Carolina. We're talking about like he's in Indonesia, he's
Yeah.
in Korea.
Singapore,
He's
or
going some yeah, he's doing some of that in fish money spending right there, going all over the place. But so what are some specific things, like when you go to Florida? I realize it's the time, like we all know it's the time, but I mean, do local bait shops, when they see some Yankee going down in there, does that help at all, or is that a waste of time?
that's hard. It's tough. Uh, I was at a really young, impressionable age, and I had a guy in a Florida bait shop ask me if I was using a spinning reel, and I don't think I've ever recovered. And my closet full of bait casters will tell you that. But it can be intimidating, but don't let it push you away. um, it may be hard to glean some useful information from guys like that, but a lot of times, if they see you there and see you there for the right reasons, you can earn their respect, and they'll share some of that info. Or you can find it yourself. Like we said before, everything will eat a minnow. Um, and I mean, really, with Linder's page, same thing. Even doesn't matter the species, the country you're in, freshwater, saltwater. If you can get it in front of them, they might eat it.
That's Troy's thing. Simple, just I'm at the right place at the right time, and doing those things. And obviously, you're never always going to do that, but the more you do it, the better you're going to be. But um, yeah, I think that there's just like people give up too easily on it, I think is the biggest thing. And it's just like one of my biggest largemouth, well, actually, probably my biggest largemouth, 8 pounds I caught in Ohio in a really
That's
small. And so here's another, like, I'm blowing out the tips. I'm people. I'm trying to encourage Josh to give you the dirty, like the concrete. Like that is a dirty tip, just so you know. Simple but dirty. Is I looked on maps and there's a name of this pond, and it was like one of the oldest ponds in Ohio, and it really was like a small lake. Okay, and that's all I'm going to say on that. But we would fish that during the daytime, and we would catch some fish, but then when you'd fish it at night, it was like that's when the freaks came out, and I legit caught an 8 pounder, and it had an 8-inch bluegill in its mouth. We actually filmed a couple producer. We filmed a couple TV shows fishing at night in small bodies of water, and primarily with a spinner bait or a top water, things like that. But um, it's the little things like finding those older bodies of water that don't have the heavy pressure and trying to get just off. It's like hunting. It's no different than that. But have any followed anything kinda similar to that?
yeah, it I've fallen down the rabbit hole when it comes to the glide bait game when I'm chasing largemouth, and I'm even trying to get some snook in Florida on them. But bass in general will eat a really large fish, if you put it in front of them. And I've even I'm throwing like I've been throwing some 9-inch glide baits, and if you would have told me that 3 years ago, I would have said you're crazy.
9 is
But
big. 9 is big.
yeah, it's fun though. It's addicting. It's a different animal. I mean, a walleye will snatch the rod out of your hand, but when you're throwing a 9-inch glide bait on an 8-foot broomstick, they snatch that thing, and you really no question if that was a bite or not.
Well, and the elephant in the room, if anybody knows you or they live in Ohio, which again, a majority of the people listening to this do not, but, the stuff we talked about there earlier is probably realistic where most people are gonna start, I think. But I think, like, for me, because I'm a trophy hunter, like, I'm a guy that kinda wants I'll miss big, but go big. Is would you say it, and again, for us, it's gonna be Lake Erie, what I'm about to say, but for somebody else listening to this, this may be Lake X or whatever. When you go to the bigger lakes, like Lake Erie, and you're fishing breakwalls, let's say, for smallmouth at a certain time of year, walleyes maybe at another time of year, or largemouth anytime because they're dumb and will hit
All
anything.
the time.
Uh, yeah, gravel carp, right? Green carp, whatever. But it's easier to miss, I think, there too, isn't it? Because you just have so much more. It's just like throw a penny and see if it's easier to find in a river
Yeah,
that's a foot deep or in Lake Erie.
and I think that's that 90-10 rule. You can cover 90% of the water, and you find that 10%, and there it is. And that 10% can be right around the corner. I think it's hard to stay motivated, but especially approaching a big body of water. But if you can find ways to narrow it down, is there a river inlet? Is there some flow? Is there a current? What's the wind direction? What's the bank structure look like? It's a break wall, but is there a riprap where it transitions? These are all little things that I'm kind of always taking note of anywhere I am.
Well, as
That
much
could
as
be
I hate to say it, the real talk is the bigger bodies of water, the networking just matters more. And on Lake Erie, obviously, like I said, there's Facebook groups and all that, but that becomes just an absolute shitstorm really fast. Like it's just
dumpster
right up,
fire.
just a dumpster fire. That's one of my favorite words. It's just a dumpster fire of people that just, the next day you show up, there's 30 people there, and you're like, gee, I wonder why things aren't working out so well. Or some guy's got a bucket full of, bass and they're eating them, and they're like, but when you approach the bigger lakes like that, what are some tips to really make this so that we can have a better trip?
Yeah, and I'll even try the spot that everybody knows about, and it may be it gets pressure all day, but you can try something a little different. Everybody knows about the Ned rig now, but like when that came out, everything would eat it. Yeah, and that was a
They still kind of do though.
it still works. I can confirm, but it's
I I can't tell everybody exactly, but I work with Z-Man, and they might have a new kind of Ned bait coming out that's kind of naughty.
Ooh.
Hmm.
I'm a big Z-Man fan.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And we got some stuff coming from them, man. They just their lure team is on a different level.
They
If you're a
they
saltwater guy and you saw the prawn
yeah.
star,
Oh, man, the Mulletron, the line through, all that. Yep. Yeah, the
I,
prawns are crazy. Yeah, that yep.
I've got one about 3 feet away from me right now that I'd be fired if I showed you, but I'll show you when we hang this thing up.
Uh,
It is naughty,
I
naughty.
with the stuff that they've been putting out, I don't doubt it. Um, I've been wanting to get my hands on the Hellraiser. That's one thing I've kind of wanted to add to my arsenal that I haven't. Because that's some, like I said, you can be somewhere, everybody's throwing everything, but if you can throw something just a little different and put something kind of in your favor, um, that's one more thing to use to your advantage.
That Hellraiser looks so jacked up that it's got to be good because it just looks ridiculous, kind of.
That's some of the things I've come across have been the most ridiculous thing ever, but they work because of that. You know, it's like it, you would look at it and say there's no way. Like I've kind of fallen down the JDM Japanese market end of things, like some of their crawler baits and stuff like that. It's like there's no way. But can confirm.
Let's expand upon that because people listening, like I can go to a 2 hour seminar and give everybody the house as far as tips. And inevitably at the end, it's almost a joke. And a lot of my buddies will comment, I'm sure, on this thing and the people that follow us because they're like, what color do I use? And you're like, dude, like to kind of like what we saw. I don't think I've ever talked with a fisherman. We've had Larry Dahlberg on here. We've had Al Linder on here. All these guys are like, get in the right area with the right deal, and then to worry about that stuff.
Yeah,
There's my Al for you. But so the thing that I would say that is different though, because when you're in a boat or when you can control your depth better, like you're not, you can know you're not going to hang up, or you can move the boat, or you can go get it easier, or on and on and on. The thing I think with fishing from shore, there are certain type of presentations, and we don't even need to get specific on the exact lure necessarily. You know what I mean? Because let's say a popper
yeah,
or whatever, or a walk the dog type bait. But there are certain types of presentations that I feel are just more suited towards fishing from shore. You
absolutely,
agree? And, and
absolutely.
so and so give me what those are for you. Give me that lineup of stuff that you got to have. It's always in the truck or it's definitely in the rotation.
Yeah, one thing's a ball head jig and a minnow profile soft plastic. A lot of times, if I'm somewhere new and I don't know what I'm dealing with, you don't know what's out there. That's the first place I start.
Like a
Some,
jerk minnow, jerk
yep,
minnows, as
yep.
they say.
Straight tail. I've been using the Demiki armored tail shad. It's a straight tail, a lot like that fork tail on the end. Um, just because it's a little bit more subtle than like a boot tail. Um, and those are, that's something you can kind of keep along with the straight tails, like a boot tail, paddle tail. I once I figured that out, it was like I said, light bulb kind of blew up. Everything will eat it. Doesn't matter the species. You just get it in front of them, and I think uh, you maybe need to play with the color a little bit. But if it's the right, if you know, then I'm not gonna say the color make it or break it. Sometimes maybe white's the way to go, but
Is the size more important, you think?
yeah, definitely. I like leaning towards the larger end because, like you, I consider myself maybe a trophy hunter, and I'll pass up some of the smaller fish, hoping for a big one. But sometimes even small fish will key in on large bait. But 3 inches is safe to start. I'd say the 3 inch range is great. Um, that's kind of like an all-purpose. I use it for uh, scouting more than anything. Um, it's a good indicator of what the bottom composition's like. You can get a lot of feedback on a spinning rod. That's the one time I do pull it out.
So, again, I'm dating myself. Things have changed, right? Like they didn't have what we just talked about back then, at least not like that. Tungsten, all that's a whole different league. But
Yeah,
the two that are kind of like old school baits that still, I know they play probably not as much, but were rattle traps or whatever you want to call them, a lipless crankbait, like a rip
yep.
and wrap by
Lipless
Rapala,
crank.
and a spinner bait. Like those are not used in boats. Like some of these guys with these $100,000 boats that go by me every day, I don't even know if they got one in the boat anymore. But again, that's a different deal because that spinner bait's so good with staying out of the weeds and cover and getting into stuff that you couldn't probably cast a lot of things like that minnow and jig head into. Is that so?
Right.
Do you use either one of those much?
Yeah, and the spinnerbait's one thing I think that's never kinda gone out of style. The
People just
chatterbait
quit using.
Yeah, the chatterbait came along. I think it kinda they got slept on a little bit, but that's one thing I've always told myself, especially being up at Lake Erie, the spinnerbait's hard to beat sometimes. But it translates everywhere, and I've caught hybrid striper on them. I've had flathead, channel cat, anything in the river eat a spinnerbait for sure. And if we're talking about, traveling light, spinnerbait is definitely one to keep on you with that jig, uh, jig head minnow, keep it simple and throw a top water in there maybe. But
It's funny because like when you said about the chatterbait or whatever you want to call it, the jackhammer who I work with Z-Man there, but their new tungsten Evo one,
yeah,
that's the sleeper. Like everyone's jackhammer because Brett Heights, obviously that's been going on a long time. Brett's actually a buddy of mine. And so, like that's people know that now. That's not a secret. But here's the one that maybe they don't. That Evo, the tungsten one. And that's actually a little bit less money, I think, too. But um that stuff they'll get hung up a little maybe better, but that's just a whole different that's that hybrid deal.
yeah, and the willow vibe, the willow blade.
Oh,
Um,
now you just let the cat out of the bag there.
yeah, that's a little that one is a little. I keep that one around close by. Um,
So what he's saying is there's a Z-Man has a jig head that's got a little willow blade that's like a chatterbait, and if you might allegedly use that with a minnow bait like a jerk shads, you might do okay.
yeah, toothy. I've heard toothy critters might like them.
Yeah, well, that you might have to carry 2 or 3 then in that case, right? The funny thing is back in the day, I'm trying to think of what brand it was under. I don't even know to be honest, but it was Dion Hibden, if you remember him. He's still around kinda. He had a hula grub. It was like Dion's grub or something, and it was basically what Yamamoto now calls a
The
hula
twin.
grub, if they even sell that anymore. But like that was the absolute deal. So it was almost like a soft plastic, jig,
Yeah,
like skirt deal. And that was the deal down in that maybe same river that me and you were talking about there in that same stretch.
yeah,
And in water that was so skinny too, you're like, huh? And we would mess with colors a little bit with that. Like you said, one day this is better. There was 3 or 4 that typically were the best. But I wonder if anybody even uses that stuff anymore, or if I went back there 30 some years later, if all of a sudden that would still work. Because nobody's thrown it, I guarantee you,
they
probably in that
probably have
long.
in probably 20 years. The hula tail grub, I think that was one of the first baits I kind of fell in love with. I can't remember where I got them, but I grew up across the street from a stone quarry, and that was one thing I learned how to Texas rig and would use that little twin tail grub. Uh, and I was in heaven. And I feel for people who don't get a chance to do that. I guess that's kind of my motivation is I will help people kind of try to find their lane, kind of find their own way because you don't have to do what I do. I don't have to do what you do. Fishing is kind of fun that way. You can find your lane, kind of put your spin on it.
Well, when I used to do it, I mean, I rarely went by myself. And so, like, again, when we would do some of these farm ponds or golf course ponds or other things, allegedly, you know, the spinner bait one night, like a big old Colorado blade spinner blade bait there, that was the deal. And my buddy be throwing a top water, never get bit, and I'm every other cast or something like that. And so having somebody with you that's throwing something a little different, even though it's kind of similar, I mean, that's no different than if we were fishing a tournament or, when I'm guiding, I don't give everybody the same color or same exact thing. We want to kind of tweak that a little bit, right?
Yeah, if you can get a buddy, that's the best way to do it. The buddy system's hard to beat.
That's going to keep his mouth shut and not put it all over it, right?
That's the hardest part. That's why that list is
You
such a
got to
short list.
gauge your pictures, people. You cannot take ridiculous pictures, right?
And like we mentioned the clout chasing. It just if you're there for the wrong reasons, I'm not here for you.
Yeah, no doubt. So, one of the other baits, I know you kind of quickly talked about it, and I'm going to help these people out because I don't know, but I know that you got to be doing this quite a bit. Is I would say a couple different types of top waters really come into play in the stuff that we're talking about doing, whether it's farm ponds, small rivers, and even reservoirs,
Absolutely.
where you're not going to hang up or 90 some percent less hang up. But, for me, it's kind of like you can get into buzz baits, and I never did that well overall on buzz baits, at least not consistently. Same thing with pop R's. Sometimes for me, it was some of those kind of walk the dog things
Yep.
that seem to be, and it was a little harder to work that because poppers and all these things would have their time. But another one I could, again, given a little bit here, is those the old like torpedoes, the little prop baits. If you're around
Yep.
smallmouth or moving water people, the prop top waters ain't no joke. Like the old devil horse,
Yep.
even a little big
The
for our
devil's
neck of the
horse.
woods.
That's a Florida bait. That's a Florida old school bait there. The devil's horse.
Hmm.
That's and
Old school.
top kind of my favorite way to throw. I'll throw top water even when I probably shouldn't, just because I enjoy it more.
Well, it's fun to watch, and you often do get some better fish, right? So, like another type that I've never really got into, and I think it's just because how stuff's set up, or maybe there's only so many hours in the fishing time there. But it seems to be more and more hype around frogs still. Like
Yeah.
like a popper frog or a skirted, just regular walk the dog frog, or
There's something about throwing a frog on a mat where you can't see what's under it, or you're waiting for that blow up, and then maybe you don't get it, but it's even just the anticipation that could be enjoyable. And frogging has come a long way, I think, for a while. You'd have to boil them in hot water to get the body soft. You'd have to bend the hooks out a little bit and do all these things. And now a lot of these frogs out of the package are ready to go, and
they are.
that's
Yeah, they
one thing
definitely are.
I enjoy, especially
So,
like these smaller ponds.
so
Frog
what's the
bite.
top? What's the top three top waters? You don't have to give me specific, but like categories. Like, what are the three types that you got to have?
Um, so I'll just say like this is midsummer because it kind of depends. In the springtime, I have a little arsenal I'll carry, but then I'll just say this is my general top water. I like a smaller profile walking bait. Normally something with three hooks, just to help the hookup ratio because sometimes they're swiping at it. Um, and then like a plopper style, whopper plopper is really hard to beat. Um, and even I think Berkeley's got the Chapo. I haven't thrown it, but I hear it's just as
Which
good.
I'm gonna interrupt you for a real second. Anybody that listen to this, if you want to hear about the Whopper Plopper and how it became about, we had Larry Dahlberg, the inventor of that, on the podcast. And Larry is salty, and I love it. And he was just calling people out, and he was telling us how it came about. And he's just naughty, the hunt for big fish, man. So go check out that podcast with. He literally told us like how it came about, and it's a pretty crazy story to be honest with you. So, but at any rate, carry on. Sorry.
No, you're good. And like a wake bait style crank down, something along that can be, man, I throw that a lot. I try to keep that one off the Instagram. That's a little putting people on game there, but the wake bait in the river.
Well, there's just not as many brands of wake baits either.
No, it's kind of tough. And I'm an admitted tackle junkie, so I'll kind of lean towards the higher end of stuff, but uh anything like Strike King is great. That's kind of where I started, middle of the road, not too hard on the wallet. And they perform as advertised. So
Yeah, Rapala has I don't even know if they call it a wake bait, but they have a what is basically what I'm going to call a wake bait. You guys look that one up. I want to say they call it the Brat or something like that. I can't remember, but that's it's naughty because it's here's the deal with it. It's more compact, and so for around our neck of the woods, it does better because
uh,
a lot of the wake baits that you're going to see are probably too big for a lot of the stuff that at least I'm talking about. Some of those small bodies where they're
yeah.
like they're Florida. They're grown up sizes on, and it's hard because I don't think they sell that many, so a lot of companies just don't make them.
No, and I mean, it's tough. Tackle's one of those things. Advertising, marketing are kind of playing against you in a way. Sometimes you kind of got to step back and say, is this a gimmick or is this you kind of got to feel it out sometimes, I think. But kind of find something that you have confidence in, I think is the big thing for me. Like, I tend to lean towards, companies that spend a little more time on R&D. So those baits cost a little bit more, but it's not necessarily something you have to do. Uh, but uh, you should see my tackle room.
Oh, it's a thing. It's like girls collect shoes and purses and stuff like that or whatever. Guys, like we're just tackle junkies. I literally just like not even a week ago, I went to a garage sale. I was working on ice stuff, and they had a little garage sale. I walked into this guy's garage, and he had a string across the wall. And I'm not going to tell you how many thousands of crankbaits I own, for many reasons, but it's in five figures, as far as numbers.
I
Okay,
I
quantity.
believe it. I believe it.
And again, full disclosure, through the years I've worked with a bunch of companies, and I've been with Rapala here for a number of years, and let's just say I have a good situation. Like, I have a lot of Rapala stuff. I use a lot of Rapala stuff. I had thousands of them before I ever worked with them. Husky jerks and things like that. But
And for a reason, because they did the work.
because they did the work. Yeah, even that's the thing is yeah, maybe sometimes we don't talk about using XYZ because that's just part of the business being real, but that doesn't mean we aren't using some of that stuff. And that would be the case with Storm. I mean, we just shot a show this summer, and I literally had not that type of bait, but the exact bait, like, because I got numbers or little things that I write on them from high school. I still had the thing. We were filming a show with that, and it was just smoking them on it. And it was a Storm Thunderstick. But anyway, get back, we're at this little garage sale deal, and this guy's got a string across the wall, and he's got all these baits, and how much for these? And he says, and I go, oh my god, oh my god. And I was like, would you give me a deal if I bought them all, or how many, or And I ended up getting a bunch of old school wiggle warts,
Oh, no
Hottentots,
way.
and Thunders. Oh yeah. Hmm.
The wiggle
Yeah.
works are come by.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna probably put that picture up on Instagram in a day or two. I mean, some of them are just beat all up, but surprisingly, they still catch them pretty good. And I wasn't gonna let it pass up. I can tell you that.
I don't that would be a hard one, even if I was just gonna hang them on the wall.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, you just feel that has to go to a person that appreciates it,
Yeah.
because this guy, he said he found him on the beach. Like, he's
Ah,
like, yeah, he didn't care. No, he's just he was it was he went out to dinner, or well, it couldn't have been too much of a dinner, but he might have went to McDonald's on me, and he thought he was living high in the hog. But I guess we both probably feel like we won a little bit. So give me a few little, we talked about kind of how and what and why, where a little bit, but and I shared with you, that I caught a legit 8-pound largemouth at night on a big old single spin spinner bait way, way, way back. What are some specific things that stand out? Because I think, when you're doing this, as much as you like to catch them and figure it out, fishermen reminisce. I don't care if they're lying if they say they aren't. And sometimes it's probably, I think it hurts us because, like when you said you go back to a pond and you don't know why, you said that earlier. I'm going to tell you
yeah.
why, because you had success at one time there, and it was like one time, and somehow, you think, well, they're still here. I got to make this work. Where you might have
It
sore
might
mouthed the only 10 fish in the damn place.
That's what
But
keeps you going there. That not knowing, I think, is what keeps me going. It's just, yeah, it worked the one time, maybe it'll work again. And like I said, maybe it's ignorance or confidence. Just
So
send it.
start with some of your give me a handful of memorable stories, but give me some of the things where you kind of and explain how you figured it out or whatever. I know I've seen some smallmouth, some saltwater fish, some of them green carp even. Ooh,
Yeah.
but
I've even gotten into some trout. I think some of the more rewarding fish that I've caught have been brown trout that I found on my own, do it yourself.
yeah,
Especially around here, they're very, scarce, I would say. So, um, but it's translated too. Like I've caught them here in Ohio doing the same thing that I did in West Virginia, excuse me. Um, and it's just, there are certain things the sense of fulfillment that comes from that, I think, is almost better than a 10-pounder. That to some people that may sound crazy, but there's the sense of satisfaction that comes from putting the work in. And this wasn't just, oh, hey, we went and got lucky. It was, I've spent the last 3 years coming out here in the wintertime, frozen waders. And then, a buddy of mine wanted to catch a brown trout before he left. And it was like, okay, let's go see what we can find. And he found an 18-inch brown trout where I would have never thought it would be.
yeah, that's very cool, very
And
cool.
I didn't even catch that fish.
It's totally different, but exactly the same. We've had Fred Zink, my buddy, on here, who's kind of a hunting guy, but he's a closet fisherman, if you will. And through the summer, we'll see text, but now because of Instagram, I'll see in the stories where he's driving a tractor, and people are like, "What are you doing in July on a tractor?" And it's like he's on an excavator or a tractor setting up for his duck hunting. And it's fortunately fishing. We don't have quite as much physical work to do. But really, it's just a different type of work, like to your point. So that's kind of even
Yeah.
why I had you on here, is because you're talking about, again, appreciating it, but knowing that these steps have to be taken. Is there anything that we kind of missed in there that are in some of those steps that?
Yeah, just there's no shortcut. I think everybody wants to look for the shortcut, but there really isn't one. And I may have spent some time looking for it, but the sooner I kind of came to the terms with, hey, just go out and try it. Put your boots on the ground, go cast, go give it a whirl. You never know, and maybe it doesn't work, but maybe it does. Um, and not everybody's willing to do that. Not everybody's willing to put in the work, and if you are, it can be rewarding.
So what about saw guys? So I'm going to give. Hopefully, you don't get mad at me. I'm going to give some people a little insight here.
Yeah,
Back when I was down at the Ohio State University, there's a few places there that they stock some trout. Okay, and I'm just going to tell you guys, think about this. So if you live in Nebraska or North Dakota or something, yeah, this is probably going to be different. But think about it a little outside the box. So a lot of these places they stock the trout in places that flow through this, because these not all these trout get caught on brown pellets. These saw guys were chewing on these rainbow trout. And there was a period of time, if you remember, where the state record was broken like boom. I mean, people were just
yeah, like
stacking giants up.
3 times in a row, real quick.
Yeah. And I'm here to tell you, one of my buddies was there when one of them was caught. And 100%, like you say, glide baits and things like that. They were these big saw guys were chasing rainbow trout, 100%. And that's how they
Oh,
were
cool.
getting so big so fast. So have you done much with the saw guy bite in some of your travels
Actually,
there?
yeah, that's kinda I lived in Westerville for a while, and I had a buddy take me to Indian Lake a few times, and kind of fell into it pretty hard, because it is accessible. You can do it at night. There's not a lot of people around most of the time, and it a lot of times if the bite's hot, you can sit on it for a while. It's kind of fun,
They
especially
get
with the salt.
they get kind of dumb. They kind of get there's a small period of
They're
time where they get
super
real dumb.
aggressive. They're super aggressive, and
Fishing rut.
they're shallow. That's like everybody that I run into thinks they're out deep. It's like a lot of times, man, they're up in the rocks chasing bait, and it can be really fun.
I don't know that I've ever shared this. I might have on the other podcast, but some of the craziest stuff, and people always like, really, you fishing from shore and you got all these, boats and all this stuff. I'm not going to say exact where, but on Erie, on a rock wall, I hung up a lure, and it was one of those they don't make anymore. And it's just like, it's not super fancy. I mean, it's not that they're not available, but and I'm out here with a really nice G Loomis rod that I'm using to remove a lure, which is absolutely rule number one you don't do. And I popped this thing free, and I'm telling you, there was some lights from the shore. I This lure popped out. I didn't have 6 feet of line out, and I watched a walleye like a bass come up. Physically saw him in the. It was off color water, and obviously at night, and you just saw his whole side. It reminded me of a saltwater situation, and it smoked it. And I've actually had that happen directly or indirectly, or bringing in and pulling it out of the water when they're pushing shad on some type of structure or something, which we happen to be standing on, as they're pushing them towards us. And that stuff gets me fired up. I mean, have you had anything, kind of similar like that where you're seeing that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't tell you. Like it took me a while. I had a friend of mine. His dad would take us fishing a lot. He always said, "Don't give up on the cast," and it was kind of like I always write it off. You'd get to a certain point, just burn it in. But then I noticed we were having bass swipe at our crankbaits as we were picking them up out of the water. And I've had saw guy do the same thing. You'll be standing there fishing on the same rock for an hour or two, not think about it, and they're actually in the rocks underneath you. It's just great. Everybody wants to cast straight out, but it's like if everybody just casted along the shore, we probably all limit out.
Well, and it's funny you say that too, because even at night when I caught that big bass, we were not casting straight. Everyone always wants to cast to the middle of the pond. And it's funny because when you're in $100,000 boat, you cast back where you're standing,
Back towards
if you
the
think
bank.
about it.
Yeah,
But we were casting on, I would say, not even maybe a 45 degree angle, maybe, and trying to work that little bit of change. But I think it was a spooking thing because it always worked better, and you had the lure in that zone longer, once you figure that out. So maybe it was a little farther or a little closer to shore, but just not directly casting on them. And now that I got things like Mega Live on my boat, I see when they get close to the boat, they're like, screw you. Like
yeah,
that you can do about whatever you want, but you get 20, 30 feet away, they're like, nah, nah, I know something ain't right up there. I'm not gonna play in traffic.
yeah. I don't know what it is, but I don't like
Yeah,
it.
exactly. What about smallmouth? I know I see a lot of pictures. You spend quite a bit of time doing that, and I totally get that because I love them as much as I dislike the green carp.
Yeah, the smallmouth are something special. Man, uh, I kind of got exposed to it maybe at a later age. If I had known that growing up, I would have probably been a it would have been bad because I grew up right off the Scioto, which is loaded. I mean, trophy size. But there's just something about their tenacity. Like you said, the green ones are kind of dumb, but the brown ones get picky. They get finicky. They get funny, and they travel. They
They move a
are.
lot.
That's what's really fun. For me is to chase them. It's kind of like they're here today. Where they're gonna. There are maybe some resident fish, but a lot of times they're so migratory. It's like we get a little bit of rain, some fish pushing. I'm almost like a junkie. I got to get back out there and see who's in hole A or B.
Is there any like saltwater thing or an individual fish even that just kind of just I can think of some like some bull reds that I've caught in out in the Gulf where they were right next to an oil pipe and I cast and twitch and boom, oh my god. Anything like that?
Yeah, that was a whole another animal for me. Because my dad liked to fish, but he bless his heart didn't know what he was doing. So for a long time, I did what he told me or what we thought we were supposed to do uh, when it came to saltwater fishing, and it took I don't know probably 5 or 6 years of me going, not catching anything, kind of trying to swear it off till the guy's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Huh?" He had seen me out there, 3 or 4 times on the same pier, not catching anything, and he could tell I was frustrated. He kind of sat me down, like, "Hey, what's up, dude? Uh, what are you trying to do here?" And I, "Hey, I'm trying to catch a snook. I've never caught one." Blah blah blah. He's like, "Take all this jewelry off your line, lose the weight, lose everything. You need this little tiny hook, a split shot, and some shrimp." And it was like, what?
Well,
I
and
don't.
that's where sometimes putting the work in isn't actual hours. You know what I mean? I think there's so many YouTube videos, which I just think, when I started, if I would have had this, how things would have been different, whether it's positive or negative. But there's so many YouTube videos. If you can find the right person that's not full of shit,
You gotta kind
and
of
and
skim through 'em tough, but
yeah, and start to kind of get to just shorten that time. So when you do have that time on the water, whether it's the gear or the technique or the locations, I think you can narrow it down a lot.
yeah, and that's again, you put some things kind of in your favor, and YouTube's great. I didn't mention it earlier, but I use it all the time, and that's been kind of like a learning tool almost. You got to find the right person, but some people do enjoy putting good info out there, you know, for the right reasons, not just to get clicks or views or whatnot. And that's really helped me out in a lot of situations where I didn't have the time to just grind. Uh, I took a trip to I hope they're doing all right. But Matlacha Island, it's outside of Fort Myers, the west coast of Florida, and that was where I kind of put the small minnow style swim bait puzzle together. Um, I kept thinking I needed, XYZ, but I was like, I have all these boot tail paddle tails. Why wouldn't they work here? And, okay, I'll go down here. And it took me sitting down and watching some videos about reading the tide and paying attention to the current and whatnot. But once that kind of, oh, they're like, we're in the river, same thing, the way that they position, to the structure, nose into the water, into the current, face that way, kind of. Once I figured that out, it was like, wow, a lot of fish act the same way. And those first couple snook I caught were life changing. It was like, light bulb went off, and I was like, I really, you can do this. You can go somewhere you don't have a history. You can catch these fish that seem somewhat unobtainable.
So, with all of your travels around and doing things, is there the one fish that you just like? That's the one. It's obvious. You either wanted to mount it, you've got a giant picture next to the Christmas tree, and your girlfriend's like, "Take really? Do we have to have this up here? Like the one?"
Yeah, it would be the Christmas card if I could have it my way.
Yes. And
and
what is it?
it's a 39.5 inch snook that I caught my last night, last good tide. Had to catch a flight in the morning, and it was my first. They call it's a flare hawk jig. It's a large hand tied jig. It's like the one I was using. I think was like a 2 ounce because of the current. But
Oh,
just the way that fish thumped that jig, I had never felt anything like that. It was almost like a bomb went off. And I was never the same. Like,
You know, the thing with saltwater, I've done quite a bit of saltwater fishing, actually getting ready to head off for a trip here in a couple of days.
jealous.
At times, they will take it like it's hooked to a F-150, and then at times it's like a walleye bite. Like,
Yeah,
I
like,
got a buddy that deep drops, you know, billfish and stuff, and it's like you're waiting for the rod to like go. I'm like, what?
yeah,
Crazy.
it is, but it can be intimidating. But now that I've kind of gained a little bit of confidence, it's kind of I can't wait to get back. It's like the challenge of like figuring the puzzle out is what's you know I've had some success, but it's almost like finding the new success, even if the fish aren't as big or are- aren't as many. It's like finding that bite that I found on my own is so much more rewarding. And like that snook, that's the same thing. I did that myself. I put in the work. I could have uh, given up easily. It's 4 in the morning. I got to catch a flight at 7, but it's like do it while you're there. Is my best advice.
Yeah, and like snook, like the night deal with those. If people, they're kind of like walleyes. Like if you get into an area, I think they're in areas that are more probably accessible to what we're doing. When it's
Yep.
dark, or definitely they're more bitey, if you will. And so
Yeah.
rather, maybe other species that's not the case, but figure out that species you're going to, whether it's watching YouTube videos or whatever, to figure out what those nuances of those things are. In Ohio, some of those saw guys and things, you ain't catching them, go at night. That's when you're going
Yeah.
to do that.
And some of that stuff translated too. It's like once, especially with light at night, if you can fish shadow lines and stuff like that, fish all kind of use the same techniques. They will hide in some of the same areas. They may be a different species completely, but you can find them. It may seem a lot more complicated than it is. I think I always gave things too much credit or tried to make things seem too hard or too difficult, but really they're not. If you just break them down into small obtainable goals, you can do anything you want.
Yeah, don't overthink it, right? So
Yeah.
leave it. Let's pretend you're Coach Josh right now. Okay. Coach Josh, leave us with a pep talk slash tips that we're going to, because again, people listening to this, maybe they sold their boat, gas is getting expensive, got kids in college, they want to go fishing. Break us down some tips. I'm not going to say anything. You take it from here. This is the motivational speech before the Ohio State against the team up north type deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, talk
So,
about putting pressure on.
well, I mean, we lost a couple of these in a row, so I mean, maybe
Yeah.
maybe those speeches haven't been that good. I don't know. Yeah. Any rate, so give us, just, and we talked about a lot of things, but give us some of those things that, like, if you were running into somebody in the parking lot and you just really wanted to help them out, those quick things that are going to apply across, multiple platforms.
Yeah. Uh, really don't let the weather stop you. So many people I run into, oh, it's raining or the wind is wrong direction, this or that. And it's like okay, maybe that uh would work sometimes, but you never really 100% know unless you go. Buy a rain jacket, buy some gear so that you're prepared. Have a little packable jacket, have a travel rod. If you're serious about finding fish, just put the legwork in. Really, that's what it comes down to. I didn't really network. I mean, I do now because I realize the importance, like you said, with some larger bodies of water. But you can go out by yourself. You can go find something that somebody doesn't know about already, and it can be, like I said earlier, really fulfilling. It's hard, but man, when it's good, it's great. It's the people that don't understand that feeling, that like sense of accomplishment, is that those are the people I think I want to help. So it's like if you have the personal drive, uh, everything else will come. The skill. Maybe you can't use a bait caster. Maybe you're intimidated. Well, that's fine. Start with a spinning reel. You don't have to spend $1,000, even though the $1,000 ones are cool. um,
Yeah, I'm not one to talk about that because I got some really nice Shimano and G Loomis gear, but you don't have to have that. But once you use it, it's like having a HD TV, some flat screen thing. Yeah, it's nicer. It is. Don't have to have it, but it
you
sure is
don't have
nice.
to, but don't be afraid to elevate your game. But you don't have to start there. Like that's
Well, I think too that some people buy really expensive stuff out of the gate and then they realize that it doesn't work for them. I'm 6'3" and I may use a longer rod or than you would or somebody else. And so figure out what you're doing and what's your comfort level. Cause it's just like guys with golf clubs and everything. Everybody has a different preference for how their whether it's their body or swing situation, whatever it may be that they're doing. So
And don't be afraid to practice. It may seem goofy to cast, at an empty cup in the yard or something, but it's like golf or hunting or anything. You can't expect to be really good at it without practicing. And it doesn't just mean catching fish. Even when I'm prepping tackle in my head mentally, I'm thinking about, where do I want to cast? If the wind is this direction, where should I go? And there is no off season, for me, you especially doing the ice thing. Um, don't think there's a set season, a set time you have to go. Just go anytime you got. Like I said earlier, if it's an hour before work, an hour after, it may seem like the wrong time to go, but just go and try it, and you'll be surprised. I think more times than not, you can find success.
I know people are always like, "What do you do when you're not fishing?" And I'm like, "We're fishing or we're
I
working on the fishing."
or fish, yeah, working on something related to it, and that I kind of took all my. I was competitive in high school. I played sports, and I kind of took all that energy. I'm kind of an adrenaline junkie too, so I've kind of like combined everything into one to kind of the whole thing is exciting to me. It's like even just it seems monotonous, but respooling line or organizing tackle, these are all things to do to make yourself a better angler. And they may not directly translate into catching more fish, but it helps put you in the right position, I think.
Well, I can tell you this along your lines of like the cup deal and stuff. I work a lot of media events with like the biggest names in the bass tour, and the guys that their ability to cast is on a level that someone couldn't around here couldn't do in 10
Couldn't
years.
do.
You know what I mean? And they do it every time. And the funny thing is I was doing some traveling this year in my non-guiding period and with a bunch of different guys across the country, they're really good at what they do. And with forward facing sonar, even though you're in theory casting, it's not like you're going to hit a tree or something with some of the rivers and stuff where you're going to hang up a lure if you're not good with it every time. And the cast, even for forward facing sonar, if you make an accurate cast and not a giant splash and the right distance and not too much slack, you catch, I would say, 5 times more fish just by the cast, even though it's in the open water. And I saw that so quickly, but I think people still don't pay attention or realize, and that's just forward facing sonar. But now we're talking what you're doing, or you're trying to fish under a dock. You're either going to lose all your tackle or you're never going to catch a fish. And so you're 100% right. Putting that time in for that too. It's not what people want to hear, but it
Yeah,
really is the difference maker. It's like, if you want to get skinnier, quit eating bonbons at 10 o'clock at night, right?
exactly. But nobody wants to hear that.
They don't. Well, Josh, I can't thank you enough for your time. You did pretty good on your closing thing there. I think we would have beat the team up north if that's what it was. And surprisingly, we always like ask somebody at the end to the point the producers are like, why do you ever ask and put somebody on the spot like that? Because they choke. So we're going to give you a passing grade for sure on that, if that makes you feel any better.
Good. Yep. I'll take
Yeah.
it.
So thanks again for giving us your time. All you guys that tuned into the Bigwater podcast, we appreciate each and every one of you. It's so late now and I have to go fish tomorrow that I can't even talk anymore, but make sure you check us out at bigwaterfishing.com, Instagram, Facebook, Bigwater Fishing, YouTube, of course. We've got this podcast on pretty much all of the download things. If you can't find it, go on to our website, but Spotify and all those good things, Apple, Amazon, Google, like all that stuff. We got it. So until the next episode, me and Josh, we're going fishing.